This is Green Africa Weekly by greenafricaprojects.org. The stories shaping Africa's green and economic future. We begin in the Middle East, where tensions involving Iran, the United States, and Israel are rising again. After a series of military exchanges and sharp diplomatic warnings, the fear now is simple. This could grow into a much wider regional conflict. And the stakes are high, because the Middle East still sits at the center of the global energy system. One place matters more than almost any other: the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow stretch of water between Iran and Oman. Yet every single day, around 20% of the world's oil moves through this corridor. Think about that for a moment. If anything disrupts this route, the impact is immediate. Oil prices jump, markets react, and global trade begins to feel the pressure. But this story is not just about the Middle East. It matters deeply for Africa. Several African countries are major oil and gas producers. Others rely heavily on imported fuel to keep their economies moving. So when geopolitical tensions rise, the ripple effects travel far beyond the region. Fuel costs rise, inflation increases, and governments are forced to adjust economic plans almost overnight. At the same time, moments like this highlight something important for the future: energy diversification and the growing urgency of investing in renewable power. For Africa, the question is not only how global conflicts affect the continent today, but how they shape Africa's long-term energy future. Next, we go to West Africa, where Ghana is making bold moves to take control of its most powerful resource: gold. In the heart of modern-day Ghana lies the cradle of a great kingdom built on gold: the Ashanti. Gold has always had a grip on humanity. Wealth, power, adoration, decoration, even obsession. And Ghana, once known as the Gold Coast, is today Africa's largest producer, ranking 8th globally. So naturally, global attention is turning. Now, who is the World Gold Council? The World Gold Council represents the world's largest gold mining companies. They help shape global standards and advise governments on how gold markets work. Here they are in Ghana, sitting down with Goldboard, the country's new gold board.
From not just the bodies such as yourselves, but also government, ministers, and the presidential office as well, such that when we get involved, I've done my due diligence in front of my board. So if we allocate resources where it be necessary, we're very comfortable to do so.
Goldboard is Ghana's way of taking back control, centralizing gold purchases, reducing smuggling, and keeping more value inside the country. So what's really happening here? Ghana is restructuring its entire gold sector. With prices at historic highs, the government is moving to capture a bigger share. A new sliding royalty from 5% up to 12%, and a clear shift toward local ownership and control. At the same time, Ghana is working with global partners to build a fully traceable gold supply chain. But of course, not everyone is on board. Major players, from the United States to China, are pushing back, warning that higher royalties could hurt investment. For Ghana, though, the logic is straightforward. If gold prices are at record highs, shouldn't the country benefit more? And between 5 and 12%, that still sounds reasonable, doesn't it? So let's check the streets of Ghana. What do people think about this shift?
I want to ask, those companies protesting, are they Ghanaian companies? If they are foreign companies, the land belongs to Ghanaians. And therefore, we have to get a major percentage from the mines that they are doing.
I think it's a good move. It's a high time Ghana gets something out of from revenue, because the foreigners come in and then they take whatever they want and then leave us. That 5%, I think it's too small.
Because gold should translate into real development. And maybe that brings us back to something deeper. We couldn't say it better than Idris Elba himself. Because in Ghana, gold is not just a commodity, it is history, it is identity, it is something spiritual, something to be respected. Next, we look at a major shift in global trade. China is opening its market to African exports with zero tariffs on a wide range of products, a move that could reshape Africa's position in global supply chains. Starting from May 1st, China is removing import duties on key goods coming from African countries, especially in sectors like agriculture, raw materials, and light manufacturing. For African economies, this means easier access to one of the largest consumer markets in the world. But this move is not happening in isolation. It comes at a time of rising global trade tensions, including protectionist policies introduced during the era of Donald Trump. Policies that reshape supply chains and force countries to rethink their trade strategies. In that context, we are seeing a clear shift. Economic ties between China and Africa are becoming stronger, as both sides look for new opportunities in a changing global landscape. For years, African countries have struggled to move beyond exporting raw commodities. Limited access to global markets has been a major barrier. This changes the equation. Zero tariffs make African products more competitive, more attractive, and more scalable. From cocoa and coffee to processed foods and textiles, the potential is enormous. If leveraged correctly, this could boost exports, create jobs, and accelerate industrial growth across the continent. But access alone is not enough. To enter the Chinese market, African producers must meet strict requirements: quality standards, certification, consistency, logistics. This is where the real challenge begins. And there is another layer to consider. China's own economic rise has lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, driven by industrialization, infrastructure, and export-led growth. For some, this raises an important question. Could elements of that model serve as a blueprint for African development? In other words, the door is open, but only for those who are ready.
当今世界变乱交织，中国作为负责任大国，积极推动全球治理变革，深化全球南方团结合作。我们推进高质量共建“一带一路”走深走实。
Governments, businesses, and supply chains will need to adapt quickly to compete at this level. Because this is more than a trade policy. It is a test of whether African economies can move up the value chain and turn opportunity into long-term growth. And starting May 1st, we will begin to see how this plays out in practice. We will be watching closely to understand what this really means for African economies. We move to Central Africa. Rwanda, often referred to as the land of 1,000 hills, is taking bold steps when it comes to movement across the continent. In recent years, Rwanda has introduced visa-free and visa-on-arrival access for all African nationals, positioning itself as one of the most open countries in Africa when it comes to mobility. The idea is simple: reduce barriers, increase connections, and make it easier for Africans to move, work, and do business across borders. Because one of Africa's biggest opportunities lies within its own internal market. And that internal market depends on three things: the free movement of goods, the free flow of capital, and the free movement of people. This vision has long been part of the African Union's agenda, but implementation across the continent remains limited. Rwanda, however, is moving ahead, creating a more open environment for entrepreneurs, workers, and investors from across Africa. At the same time, Africa is home to one of the youngest populations in the world, a generation that is mobile, connected, and ambitious. But for that potential to translate into real growth, mobility must be supported by policy, infrastructure, and cooperation. Because a more connected Africa means stronger trade, more collaboration, and more value created within the continent itself. So the question is no longer only about looking outward, but about strengthening what exists within Africa. Rwanda may not be the final model, but it is a clear signal. And if this momentum continues, the free movement of Africans across Africa could become one of the key drivers of long-term economic growth.
It's not about you, it's not about me, it's about us. We are a team. Africa United.
In other news, we're entering the world of magic mushrooms. Now, just to be clear, at Green Africa Weekly, we are not promoting anything illegal. But we are based in Amsterdam after all. A newly identified species of psychedelic mushroom discovered in Africa is helping scientists better understand the evolutionary origin of one of the world's most well-known fungi, Psilocybe cubensis. According to research published in the National Library of Medicine, Nautilus, and Science.org, this discovery may finally settle a long-standing debate about where these mushrooms actually come from. What makes this species particularly interesting is that Psilocybe cubensis is one of the most widely cultivated mushrooms in the world. Easy to grow, and yes, quite potent. So, not exactly beginner-friendly nature. But here's the twist. Until now, scientists didn't even realize it may have evolved as a completely separate species. Which brings us to a bigger picture. The world of fungi, one of the oldest, most mysterious, and still deeply misunderstood ecosystems on Earth. And honestly, it doesn't surprise us that Africa plays a role here. In Zambia, for example, there are long-standing stories of powerful mushroom species. Some so large, entire families could share a single one. Yes, one mushroom. At Green Africa Weekly, we'll keep following the science and the stories behind what might just be one of nature's most fascinating creations. Thank you for watching the very first episode of Green Africa Weekly. We appreciate the work of CGTN, Reuters, Al Jazeera, DW, First Post, and others, whose footage was used under fair use. We're here to bring a fresh perspective on Africa's green and economic development. See you next week.